There are stories that do not live on paper, or screens, or archives. They live in the empty spaces between memory and silence, whispered like a warning you can't quite decipher. They are called wisdom stories. At least, that's the name people gave them after fragments surfaced in places they shouldn't have. A sermon transcribed but never delivered. A file number cited in a document, but the document itself missing. A phrase scratched into the wood of a church pew where no one sits anymore. They say wisdom stories were not written to comfort, but to test, to fracture, to decide who listens and who obeys. Every retelling feels slightly different, as if the story itself resists capture. And yet the shape of it remains, a lesson that bends the listener, not toward truth, but toward someone else's design. Long before the word was ever typed into a forum post or carved into an evidence box, these stories were spoken like incantations in rooms where no light was allowed. You don't find wisdom stories. They find you. And once you hear one, even once, you begin to notice the silence that follows, like the air itself is waiting for you to repeat it. It doesn't begin with discovery. It begins with intrusion. A sound, a phrase, a name that should mean nothing, yet carries the weight of something impossibly familiar. Wisdom stories. Two words that don't seem to belong together, and yet they echo like the aftertaste of a dream you thought you had forgotten. You don't remember learning them. You don't recall anyone ever saying them aloud. And yet, the moment you hear them, you feel a faint recognition, like someone whispering your own thoughts back to you. The traces don't exist in plain sight. They don't live in books, or archives, or academic references. Instead, they slip into the margins of things you were never supposed to read. A transcript of a sermon, dated but never delivered, ends abruptly with a reference, and in accordance with the wisdom story. No explanation. No context. Just a phrase hanging there, untethered, like a cut thread from an unseen loom. Government documents, unearthed through long-forgotten FOIA requests, contain blacked-out sections, entire pages swallowed in ink, with only one fragment spared, Project Wisdom. No glossary, no appendix, no elaboration. It appears, then disappears, like the trace of something half-erased but never gone. On forums, the whispers spread in more unsettling ways. A post appears in the middle of the night. The author says they dreamed of a story they could not stop repeating in their head. They claim the dream forced them to speak aloud in the dark, the words not their own. It wasn't my voice, one post reads, but it was speaking through my mouth. Within hours, the account is deleted. Not suspended. Not banned. Deleted, wiped out like it had never existed. Threads that try to reference it unravel. Cached versions break apart mid-sentence, as though even the memory of the post is corrupted. And yet, the screenshots remain. A few scattered images, fragments of sentences, the name wisdom stories tagged over and over again by accounts that vanish as quickly as they appear. Patterns emerge when you look closer. Always at night. Always through anonymous voices. Always repeating the same details. The phrases feel ancient, older than language, and they come unbidden, like static crawling into the brain. And then, the silence. Users stop posting, or worse, post final updates that sound more like confessions. One says they couldn't sleep after hearing the story because the silence between words began to feel alive. Another admits they caught themselves humming the phrases in public, without realizing it, until strangers started staring at them. Days later, that update vanishes too. The question is not whether the stories are real. The question is whether they're meant to be remembered. Because the fragments don't behave like folklore. They don't grow through embellishment, or exaggeration, or cultural repetition. Instead, they wither. They vanish. They erase themselves, leaving only the shadow of their existence in the minds of those who dared to repeat them. And yet, that shadow is enough. Enough to make you feel like you've already heard them. Enough to make you certain you've already been marked by them. Recognition comes before belief. That is the first danger. You don't need proof to feel it. You just need the uncanny tug, that deep, nameless weight in your chest telling you that these words do not sound new. They sound remembered. They sound inherited, as if you carried them all your life without knowing it. To speak them aloud is to awaken something in yourself that was never asleep. Every whisper, every deleted post, every redacted line points to the same, impossible truth. These stories are not trying to be found. They are trying to find you. And once they do, once the words settle in the cracks of your memory, you will never again be sure whether you discovered the story or whether the story discovered you first. They call them stories, but nothing about them behaves like fiction. They read like riddles with no answers, parables where the endings have been deliberately amputated, leaving the listener suspended in a state of unfinished thought. The words seem designed to burrow, not to soothe. When you lean closer, you begin to see the pattern. These fragments were never written to comfort you. They were written to measure you, to test the shape of your obedience. In archived sermons, faded with age, the language suddenly shifts. A verse that once carried familiar rhythms bends in the middle, like a fracture in the bone. The cadence changes, a phrase intrudes where it doesn't belong, and suddenly a passage about mercy becomes something else entirely, something colder, something that does not forgive. Scholars who trace the manuscripts notice these insertions repeat, but never in the same place, almost as if the text is moving underneath their eyes. Leaked documents take it further. References surface to unregistered theological doctrine, words that sound bureaucratic but feel like an alarm. Entire sections are blacked out, lines swallowed in thick ink, leaving only a hollow outline of what should have been there. In the margins, fragments remain. Phrases about obedience, about separation, about the test hidden inside the telling of the tale. A doctrine without a church. A scripture without a God. And then comes the theory, the one whispered among researchers who know too much. These aren't stories at all. They are weapons. Psychological structures designed to split a listener in two, to make them question which voice in their head belongs to them, and which belongs to the story itself. The beauty of it, if you can call it beauty, is that no one needs to enforce it. Once you've heard it, you enforce it on yourself. The fear settles in when you realize what that means. If these stories are engineered tools, then someone, somewhere, is choosing the lessons hidden inside them. Someone decides what you learn when the ending is cut away. Someone decides what you fear when the words echo back at you in your own voice. And if they have the power to decide the lesson, then they also have the power to decide the punishment. Every story has a teller, but those who try to speak of wisdom rarely remain to finish their sentences. The trail is littered with half-formed voices, historians who vanish mid-research trip, archivists who post a single corrupted file before deleting everything and disappearing from the digital record, late-night forum users who leave behind fragments of audio no one has ever recovered. Their silence lingers longer than their words, and it hangs like a shadow over anyone who dares to follow. Case files exist, though never officially linked. A researcher traveling through Eastern Europe, last seen entering a monastery library said to house forbidden parables, never returned. An independent journalist leaked fragments of a redacted doctrine, promising a full expose, then left a final message that simply read, "They're already inside the story." His account vanished hours later. Families speak in the language of grief, but also of warning. Police reports end abruptly, investigations go cold, and the families are often approached quietly, advised not to keep asking questions they cannot afford to answer. On Reddit, in the labyrinth of r/unresolved mysteries, patterns begin to form. Users connect missing persons timelines with wisdom-related leaks. Names that never appear in newspapers are whispered through comment chains. The archivist who recorded a faint audio sample said to contain the cadence of a wisdom recital, the linguist who spoke of finding parables that mutated each time he read them, the student who uploaded screenshots of a corrupted manuscript before vanishing from her dorm room. Every thread ends the same way. Comments deleted, accounts scrubbed, fragments left behind like digital ghosts. The pressure point isn't the mystery itself, it's the grief that trails behind it. Parents who leave voicemails that will never be answered. Children who inherit only silence. A widow who swears her husband's final email was not written in his voice, though it came from his account. Each story sharpens into an accusation. The closer you get, the more you put the ones you love at risk. And here the paranoia turns inward. It's not just about what happened to them. It's about what might happen to you. Every whisper, every trace of vanished testimony forces you to ask whether listening is an act of complicity. To watch, to follow, to even allow the story inside your head is to step onto the same path. The grief is no longer distant. It waits quietly for the moment you realize that every erased witness was once an observer too. The stories don't spread the way myths are supposed to. They don't move through the slow drip of rumor or the natural erosion of memory passed from mouth to mouth. They spread like something alive. Like a virus that doesn't need a host to travel, because the system itself carries it to you. No one uploads them, and yet they appear. No search results exist, and yet your recommendation feed whispers their names in the quiet hours of the night. It feels less like discovery and more like design, as though the story was never waiting to be found, but waiting to find you. Users describe the same uncanny phenomenon, phantom recommendations. They insist they never searched for the word wisdom, never typed a phrase even close to it. And yet, without warning, videos with cryptic titles slip into their autoplay queue. Clips that last seconds before vanishing. Strange thumbnails that look different each time you refresh. Some describe the sensation of being seen by the feed, as if the algorithm isn't predicting your interest but prescribing it. Like a quiet hand guiding you where it wants you to go. Digital archaeology reveals fragments, half-deleted video files buried in caches, showing distorted voices repeating phrases in uneven rhythms. Always the same cadence, always cut off before resolution. You never hear the end, but you hear just enough to feel it lingering afterward, like a word caught in your throat. Investigators who try to archive these clips report the files corrupting upon download. Some describe hearing faint whispers even after the video is gone, as though the story remains behind in the silence. On Twitter, threads appear and disappear within hours. Researchers tag the word wisdom alongside terms like doctrine or military psychology, only to find their accounts suspended without explanation. The archives of those threads exist in screenshots and mirrors, but the original conversations dissolve, names erased, timelines fragmented, entire dialogues reduced to broken echoes. The erasure is too consistent to be coincidence, and too targeted to be accidental. The fear isn't just in the content. It's in the mechanism itself. The way the stories seep into the very architecture of the platforms we use to distract ourselves, to numb ourselves, to forget. They don't need to be searched for. They arrive uninvited, engineered for the restless, for the insomniac, for the ones awake at 2 o'clock. Them when the mind is most vulnerable. You don't stumble into them. They choose you. And the deeper you sink into their pattern, the harder it is to escape the thought that maybe the algorithm isn't just listening to what you click, maybe it's listening to what you fear. There's a moment that comes after the telling, a space that doesn't feel like silence so much as suspension. The wisdom story ends, but it does not leave. You sit there listening to the absence, realizing that something has shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. The air feels heavier. The walls feel closer. It's not haunting and it's not revelation. It's imbalance, as though you've been pressed into a ritual you never consented to. The story withdraws, but its weight remains, coiled and waiting for the next breath you take. FOIA fragments give it a name, though never a definition. Buried among redacted reports are scattered references to ritual silence, always italicized, always followed by a black bar. It is listed as an intended outcome of narrative testing protocols, but the explanations end just as they begin. The words collapse into censorship before you can understand them. And perhaps that's the point, that you don't need the explanation to experience it. You already know what they mean by silence because you've already felt it. Survivors of cult-like enclaves, groups no one admits to joining, describe the same aftermath in their testimonies. First comes the repetition, the obsessive compulsion to retell the fragments, to whisper them in your own voice late at night, as though saying them aloud will release you. But it never does. It only deepens the stillness that follows. Then comes the hollow quiet, the waiting. A pause stretched so thin it feels like a signal. Some survivors admit they stayed awake for nights afterward, certain something else was supposed to happen, terrified of what it might be. The climax is not revelation but guilt. Listeners confess that they feel contaminated, as though by repeating the stories they have infected someone else. One describes it like a contagion passed mouth to mouth. Once the words escape you, they live in someone else. Another writes that she stopped speaking for weeks, terrified that even casual conversation could carry the rhythm of a wisdom phrase she no longer controlled. The grief of those who disappeared folds into the paranoia of those who remain, each voice carrying both mourning and warning. And this is where the silence sharpens into something unbearable. Because the deeper you study the wisdom stories, the more they seem to adjust themselves around you. The more you repeat them, the more you begin to feel observed. Every phrase like a mirror turned back toward its reader. Every silence, an ear pressed close. Until at last you realize, the story was never only about what you were hearing. The story was always about what was hearing you.